Welcome and thank you for joining us here in beautiful Key West, Florida. This is a part one of a two-part video looking at military points of interest in and around the island. The focus of this video is the area of Mallory Square and Old Town. Let's go look at some military history of Key West. Today, Key West is known for its tropical style, nightlife, and laid-back atmosphere. But this has not always been the case. Since becoming part of the United States as a territory in 1822, Key West has been utilized as a strategic military site. The island's location on the 90-mile-wide Straits of Florida, connecting the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico, earned Key West the nickname Gibraltar of the Gulf. Trains were not being used in the United States at the time, and the majority of commerce was by sea. Having a safe trade route was important. Piracy had become an increasing problem for this area. Commodore David Porter of the U.S. Navy was commanded to the West Indies Anti-Pirate Squadron, whose mission was to end piracy in the region. He erected a naval base of operations in Key West. With a fleet of 16 ships nicknamed the Mosquito Fleet, he quickly and efficiently eliminated the pirate threat. Fort Zachary Taylor is part of the Florida State Park System and has been designated a National Historic Landmark encompassing 54 acres. Construction for the fort began in 1845 and was completed by 1866. During the Civil War, Key West was the only southern city held by federal troops during the duration of the war. Its location was used for the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's East Gulf Coast Blockading Squadron. President Lincoln's orders for a naval blockade of Confederate ports in 1861, the U.S. Navy established the East Gulf Coast Blockading Squadron based at Fort Jefferson, Fort Taylor, and the Port of Key West. The squadron's area of operations stretched from Cape Canaveral around the Keys to Pensacola. More than 1,500 blockade runner ships were intercepted from 1861 through 1865. Many historians believe Key West's strategic location and the squadron's success in blockading southern ports severely reduced the Confederate supply lines and shortened the duration of the Civil War. The fort's 140 guns were a huge deterrent for any Confederate hopes of retaking Key West. The guns were last manned during the Spanish-American War. During a modernization period before the Spanish-American War, a desalination system was installed along with plumbing for sewage. Fort Zachary Taylor was used during World War I and World War II for observation and later radar surveillance. It's easy to see from this vantage point how important the fort was for defense. Later, the fortress was turned over to the Navy to be maintained before becoming a National Historic Landmark. Currently, local reenactors create living programs on the third weekend of each month. West Martello Tower is located along the coast to the east of Fort Zachary Taylor. Its strategic location availed it to be used for many purposes. Construction was started in 1863 during the Civil War. A yellow fever outbreak in the same year caused fort carpenters to switch from fort construction to coffin construction. In 1864, another yellow fever outbreak took its toll on workers. The following year, a hurricane destroyed much of the construction. By this time, the Civil War was nearing its end and construction was never totally completed. Since the Key Westers were mainly Confederate sympathizers, tactics were employed to ensure the safety of the construction and troops. Train rails were built to connect all of the fort systems and were used to transport workers, supplies, and troops. During the Spanish-American War, the fort was used for observation and quartering of troops. From the beginning of World War I until 1949, the fort was used as an anti-aircraft battery with guns being positioned on the towers. In 1949, the property was turned over to Monroe County. The fort was in a dilapidated state and scheduled for demolition. Representative Joe Allen convinced the Monroe County Commissioners to stop demolition. He arranged for the Key West Garden Club to manage the property. The fort was then declared a National Historic Site in 1949 and placed on the National Register of Historic Places. West Martello Tower has become a tropical garden by the sea for both native and exotic plants. Much like its sister to the west, East Martello Tower construction began during the Civil War but was also never completed. Its thick walls were designed to withstand intense offshore bombardment, but the development of exploding shells made the tower's defenses obsolete. The fortress never saw action of any kind, and today the citadel houses an expansive collection of Key West artifacts, historic documents, and military hardware. The central tower of East Martello is still intact and offers a prime observation point to the Atlantic coast. The fort is considered the best example in the United States of the Martello era of fortress design, depicting round structures up to 40 feet with thick masonry walls. Fort Jefferson, approximately 60 miles west of Key West, is located on Garden Key. It can be reached by ferry or seaplane. Construction began in 1846 and was completed during the Civil War. It is the largest masonry structure in the Americas, covering 16 acres and using 16 million bricks. During its peak, it housed over 2,000 military and civilian personnel. In order to support such a large population on an island lacking water, sand-filled columns were built into the walls. Unfortunately, the sand dissolved into the water, leaving only the cistern under the parade grounds as drinking water. Steam condensers distilled 7,000 gallons of water per day during the Civil War. One of the most notable residents of the fort was Samuel Mudd, who, after setting the broken leg of President Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was incarcerated for conspiracy. Mudd diligently worked with yellow fever sufferers at the fort and was pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. In 1888, the fort was reduced to a quarantine station, and in 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt declared the area a national park. The Armory building was built in 1903 as the headquarters for the Monroe County Militia, which evolved into the 438th Company Florida National Guard. The Armory houses the troops and their weaponry. The units originated from the pro-Union Key West Rifles during the Civil War and then the Island City Guards in 1888. The building served as a training facility during both World Wars and later as a community center. Peary Court Post Military Cemetery is a 19th century cemetery wherein United States Army soldiers and their families were interned from the Peary Court Army Post built nearby in 1831. Most of the 468 people who were buried there died during the Civil War, primarily from yellow fever and typhoid. Although many remains were removed for reinterment at Fort Barrancas, Pensacola, Florida, remains were discovered during an archaeological excavation in 1996 and are still interned at this site. A marker designates the cemetery area, which is now maintained by the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Coast Guard headquarters is the oldest brick structure in Key West. It was built by the U.S. Navy as a coal depot and storehouse. Navy servicemen coordinated refueling steamships at this location from 1856 to 1900. During the Civil War, the Union's West Indies Blockade Squadron was headquartered here. In 1932, the building became part of the 7th Lighthouse District, and in 1939 it served as the U.S. Coast Guard headquarters. We are at Clinton Square across from the old Coast Guard building. Clinton Square is literally an island on an island. It is landlocked by Front Street, Whitehead Street, and Green Street. This memorial represents two perspectives of how the Civil War affected the residents of Key West. The obelisk in the center of the plot was erected by the Navy Club of Key West for the Union soldiers who lost their lives during the Civil War. The metal fence surrounding the obelisk was erected by R. Vining Harris, a staunch Confederate, to memorialize the loss of Confederate soldiers. This memorial was placed in 1866. A scaled-down version of the Bayview Park Veterans Gardens is located in Old Town Mallory Square. The Florida Keys Military Memorial consists of 12 plaques representing the military actions in which Key Westers played a significant role, beginning in 1822 when the U.S. Navy raised a flag over Key West. A monument lists Key's soldiers killed in these conflicts adjacent to the memorial. We're down here in Mallory Square, and it's known for fun, wreckers, and sunsets, but we wanted to point out to you a few points of historic and military memorials. The first one is the gun turret from the USS Maine. The Maine exploded in the Havana Harbor on February 15, 1898. Almost immediately, as soon as it exploded, conspiracy theories started to flourish, but they've never actually been able to determine the cause of the explosion. This gun turret was from a 10-inch forward gun off of the Maine bow. The salvage mission to recover the Maine and bring it home along with its crew involved an extensive treatment of draining part of the Havana Harbor to bring everybody home. This is the Maine Memorial. Citizens of Key West erected this in honor of the victims of the USS Maine. It serves as a silent tribute to the disastrous sinking of the Battleship in Havana Harbor on February 15, 1898. 24 sailors, 17 of them unidentified, have been found their resting place here in Key West. On June of 1898, Commander James Forsyth requested that the area be enclosed, and this fence soon arrived. The Navy in 1899 then sent tombstones in their first effort to memorialize the sailors. The names on the tombstones were of the identifiable place, and unidentified sailors were then given a number. William Pauly was a pioneering cameraman employed by Edison Films. He was hired along with journalist Carl Decker to report the news for the New York Journal. They were sent to Key West on assignment on March 27, 1898, to record history. With his camera, Pauly shot 150 feet of film and recorded the procession of 9 flag-draped coffins honoring sailors from the Maine battleship. In what is arguably the earliest U.S. military funeral captured on film, the team brought the news to movie theaters across America. The film depicts small groups of people walking parallel to the caskets and along the street. At the time, a custom prevailed in Key West that was not practiced elsewhere in the United States of closing stores while a funeral procession passed. All business along the line of march was suspended, and last tribute of respects paid thus to the dead. As military dead, the Maine sailors were not native citizens of Key West, but the residents embraced them as their own. The Maine battleship had been stationed in Key West, and the islanders considered the sailors family. When plans were announced to relocate the initial 24 burials to the mainland for reburial, Key West residents petitioned the Navy Department to keep the bodies. Impressed, the Navy Department agreed in November 1899. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers worked diligently to salvage the Maine from Havana Harbor. The remaining 239 victims had been interred in Cuba and were relocated to Arlington National Cemetery in December 1899. The mass now stands in tribute at Arlington as a monument.